So there are also Dutch painters that produce art that is religious based. Often it's because they've taken a trip to Italy and have seen art by artists like Caravaggio. We know that Terbruggen was one of these artists. Oftentimes, these artists did art like this without a patron. Um, while there was not a large push for selling it, it still was produced. We know that Terbruggen loved Caravaggio's work when he went to Italy, and he was moved by it. He doesn't follow suit, though, with a dramatic palette like Caravaggio's use of tenebrism. Instead, he uses a less dramatic palette. It softens the scene a bit, and it creates a sense of emotional intimacy between the six men that are painted in the scene. It still has a split second timing that we identify with art, with Baroque art, and it carries on the northern traditions of paying close attention to the surface textures of the clothing, especially of the wall behind the Calling of St. Mark, or behind Mark. You can see the surface layer pulling off of the wall. Frans Hals was a portrait painter who was popular with the guilds and the militias of the community. So he actually takes over as the portrait superstar to Van Dyck. Van Dyck's kind of in a different area in terms of geographical area, so they kind of work together at the same time, not certainly on the same paintings, but we can see that Hals has been influenced somewhat by Van Dyck because he's using that full-length portrait of the front man instead of the half portrait that we had been seeing during the Renaissance times. So the first person that you see up front is the front man to the militia. He's probably the new guy that's taken over the this particular battalion. The guy that's sitting down is probably one of the retired militiamen. And Frans Hals does this revolutionary thing with the flags where he kind of creates a bookend effect to each side of the painting with this large flag that goes to the left and the placement of the figures to the right. It's his way of kind of grouping the figures together so that they don't seem like they're scattered about the entire painting. As well as we see he draws attention to in the center, and he doesn't put him directly in the center so that the painting is more interesting. He draws attention to him by the way the swords go behind his head, and the flag to his left really highlights his presence within the painting. Hals has that great attention to detail that we see that's so common in northern painting. He's very influenced by Van Dyck. You can see the textures of the material. And of course, you see evidence of the militia being well educated. There's a man reading a book to your right. Obviously, they are a militia that protects some part of the community because they have swords and flags and all of that. Frans Hals was the first to create a painting where the group of people are actually doing something other than sitting there staring for the portrait. It became popular to decide how we wanted to represent a portrait of someone that was interesting instead of just sitting there looking at the person looking at the canvas. Frans has decided to come up with this great composition that shows the people are doing something interesting, like reading and talking to each other, and just something interesting to look at. This would have been placed somewhere in a prominent part of the community, probably in the town hall, so that people could actually see the painting in a public way, and it would remind them that they are well protected and to feel safe within the community. 1630, female artists are more successful here than anywhere else in Europe. She's a student of Frans Hals, and she does subtle paintings that have social commentary to them. She likes to paint portraits of the middle class that convey personality, character, and spontaneity. She has some Calvinist austerity, but also her social status is visible. Self-portraits, especially of women artists, emphasize the act of painting. It claims that she is a painter, which is a big deal because women were not often able to be artists. The social commentary that you see that she's currently painting has to do with a person who likely plays the fiddle for money. That person would have been of middle class social standing, but you see that Judith Leister herself is of the upper middle class. She wears very fine fabric clothing. There are many small details that pay attention to texture, and she is presented as someone who is of upper class compared to the person that she is painting. So why would Judith Leister be more successful here than any other place in Europe? Keep a hold of that question. It will be part of our delve deeper. This is Jacob van Ruysdael's view of Haarlem from the dunes at Overzien. Jacob van Ruysdael's view of Haarlem from the dunes at Overzien. It's a landscape painting that was very popular in the time of Ruysdael's. He is painting he's painting Haarlem, which is a town, a Dutch province. For one thing, Van Ruysdael was a specialist in landscape painting. It was his little duchy master was landscape painting. He had many pupils, and he was a very popular artist in the Dutch areas. The landscape is a popular theme, but nationalistic pride in the country is also very popular. The area that he's painting is the area that is flatland right outside of Haarlem. Some of the symbols that we see in the painting are the church towers and windmills that are in the distance. You can also see people drying linen on the grass. They're stretching these large expanses of fabric across the landscape. This was one of the prominent businesses of the Dutch. I don't know how many of you know much about Dutch trade, but the Dutch were responsible for fabric houses. They were heavily into the textile mills. And so this scene is one in which the linen has been bleached and they're drying it in the sun. The linen naturally has sort of a grayish color whenever it's created, and then they bleach it so it gives you this nice white fiber in which you could print a colorful print on. Holland has a unique situation in the Protestant Reformation. It's sort of in this tiny corner of Europe. There are only 7 provinces of the area that are coastal. and they have the best harbors and port towns in all of Europe. There is no patronage in art at this point. Protestants believe that the images of the church are idolatry, and so because of this, as we have talked, landscapes are a popular theme. In this area, the loomingness of aristocracy, there is none to speak of. The power in this area are by these small duchies. And oftentimes the duchies had links to the church, so it is possible that the Catholic Church that looms in the distance is a symbol of threat. It's also possible that the Catholic Church that looms in the distance is maybe looked at as a possible art avenue. This is an image of middle-class merchant investors. The harbor towns in Europe, in Northern Europe, replace Venice as one of their great importers of European goods and exports. We see things coming in and out of Europe through towns like Haarlem, from all over the world. Ivory from Africa, tea from Asia, and spices. The money went into the hand of the multitudes of investors that invested in the shipping companies. And this was the first time that capitalism really fuels life. All of the middle-class citizens bought art to hang on their walls. The middle class were not used to commissioning art, and it took artists time to figure out what they wanted in the new art market. Now, artists make paintings in advance and hope that they will sell in galleries, which leads to these little Dutch masters that specialize in things like Van Rysdale did in terms of landscape painting. We call them little Dutch masters because they specialize in one subject area. So the other masters that we looked at were the Vanitaases. We're looking at the landscape paintings. Rembrandt was a master of portraiture. Frans Hals, also a master of portraiture. So with that line of thinking, one of our other major specialists is Vermeer. Vermeer specializes in genre scenes, scenes of everyday life that were very popular with the Dutch. His art in particular was not popular with the Dutch. They felt like his work was harsh and crude. This opinion could have partially came from the use of a machine that he used called the camera obscura. Vermeer lives in a time of intense war between the Protestants and the Catholics. It's one thing I really want to be sure that we have covered in this lesson fully is this war between the Protestants and the Catholics is not simply a conflict. People are dying over this issue. Major countries go to war because of it. This is the challenge of the divine right to rule. I don't think that Martin Luther intended that whenever he first wrote the treatise on the Catholic Church, that he nails the 95 Theses to the wall or to the door of the church. I don't think that he intended for that. I think he just wanted to see a change in the ways of the church. And in turn, that led to a change in power differential. Vermeer's paintings try to suggest an order and peace. He wants to suggest an antidote to the chaos that Vermeer lives in. They force us to stop to look because he is so very good at looking. I would say this is the one place that Northern European artists really shine. It's in looking. They are very good at picking apart these minute little details, just like Van Eyck is really good at surface detail. Vermeer is good at detail. He's good at crispness. He's good at perfect forms. The camera obscura helps Vermeer look more. He follows the typical hallmark of artists in the North. He loves texture and records things so accurately that it seems as if he's painting a photograph of his subject matter. This is the camera obscura that Vermeer uses. It's Latin, it comes from dark chamber, and it's an optical device that led to photography and eventually the actual camera. The device consists of a box or a room with a hole in one side. It allows him to record what he sees by tracing it on a piece of paper. In turn, this technique flattens out the spatial relationship between objects. So a lot of times in art school, they would tell us that they wanted us to go sketch from real life. They didn't want us sketching from pictures, and it's because pictures tend to flatten out the space. They don't have any way to communicate the depth of field. And so they make objects that are close to the camera very large, and objects that are far away from the camera seem smaller than they should be. The people of his time don't know why they do not like his work. They just know that they don't. And this is Johannes Vermeer's Woman Holding a Balance from 1664. It is oil on canvas. It is the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. If you ever get the opportunity to go to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., I highly recommend that you do so. She is Dutch, and you see her balancing the scale. She's weighing gold. And you see the light that comes through the window that shines on her wimple. The light that comes through the window highlights the textures of her garment. You can see how the light catches, or how her wimple catches the light, almost to the point where it's see-through. Her face feels so very realistic. I could imagine feeling her soft porcelain cheek. It's so tiny and delicate and fair and very well described in terms of flesh tone. She wears a jacket with fur. We understand the texture of the fur, so much so that if we took a quick glance, we might think that this was a photograph. You see that the table comes directly out at you, and there's a chair that sits at the end of the table. There is a piece of fabric draped around the chair and the end of the table, and it provides sort of a way to compare the brightness of the gems that she has spilling out of the money box. Behind her, you see a religious painting on the wall with, looks like, the Assumption of Jesus. This is the allegory of the art of painting. It's a painting that has symbols of a creative act. It is a self-portrait of Vermeer painting a portrait. And just like all Dutch painting, we see lots of symbolism in it. This is a symbol of the creative act. The model, the costume, the laurel wreath, the model holding an instrument. It doesn't seem to be a 17th century piece. The painting seems wonky because Vermeer is using the camera obscura. That puts this painting really ahead of time. He creates it so that it seems as if there's a scene going on behind the curtain and you are the peeker of a private moment between the model and the artist who is painting. The muse is history. The map has a large crease in it, which is so clear that it seems as if we could touch it and know its texture. The composition compels the viewer to keep our view within the frame. He does that by using this curtain to sort of allow us to peek in. The color is amazing. It's rich and well saturated. So much so that Vermeer's tights seem to pop out at us because of how chromatic they are in the composition. Everything is mapped out. Nothing is left to chance. Vermeer has a very technical style that we associate with the art of the North. This is Vermeer's view of Delft. You can see his attempt here at landscape painting that he's not as good at as he is the genre paintings. You can see that he's recording the houses that are across the bay. This area of the world has lots of water. Their canals system is very sophisticated. And a lot of their trade comes through ports in the waterways. It really highlights why his work was not popular with people in his time, and that is because you can see how tiny the people are compared to how large the houses are. They're just not proportionate. If you were trying to take a picture, this is exactly what the picture would look like in terms of comparing the people to the houses. The bottom line was Vermeer was just ahead of his time. He was way ahead of his time, and his paintings did not seem to appeal to the Dutch people because he was using technology that they weren't used to seeing being used in creating these types of works of art. So this is Jan Steen. Jan Steen is another of the genre painters. Your book makes a point that Jan Steen tends to paint with wider brush strokes than Vermeer, which I guess is true. He definitely has more of a painterly feel to the textures of the fabrics in his work. Jan Steen marries a landscape painter's daughter. That was his first marriage, and his family was Catholic. They ran a tavern, and his second wife worked in a meat market. They had 8 kids, and he died at age 53. He is distinctive as a Dutch artist because he contrasts with Vermeer. Vermeer is very systematic. He's very tightly rendered. His work is very surface detailed, like Van Eyck. Whereas Jan Steen's work has more of a satirical vein to it. It's done sort of in the onlooker feel in terms of the way he probably felt most of his life, being an onlooker as a tavern owner. He often saw endless amounts of lively chaos in his world. Here you see the Feast of St. Nicholas. The Feast of St. Nicholas would have been a Christmas-type celebration. Steen paints over 800 works, but he never achieves financial success. Mostly, I suppose, because he was mostly painting for preaching purposes, to create moral stories and visuals that represented the proverbs that were part of his world. His paintings of children are especially remarkable. He captures not only their childish style, but sort of their fleeting moods, their expressive manners. He uses these more rapid and fluid brush strokes than we've seen of the genre painters thus far. Steen has used lots of Dutch imagery in here to represent things that the Dutch used as moral stories and messages that we, as onlookers, because we live in the day and age that we do, don't really get. For example, this basket that someone has knocked over that is rolling all over the floor, that's about excess. It's about the morality of using what you have. This shoe that is left unturned has a moral message as well. So I'm going to put this in the Delve Deeper activities. If you're interested in Jan Steen's messages, maybe you will research some of the moral symbols within the work of art.